Hey there, everybody. This is Tommy Cook, and it's time for the first ever edition of the Retro Racing Roundup, where we're going to take a look at some classic races from yesteryear and pair them with some historical hindsight and analysis. And when I say it like that out loud, it doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, but that's what we're doing here on Turn 200. But here's the thing: is I know it's fun because, first of all, a huge shout out over to Wrestling with Regret, Brian Zane. He does this thing called the Classic Pay-Per-View Review. If you're a wrestling fan at all, you've probably seen it. I don't want to say I'm copying his format because I'm not. I want to say that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from it creatively and professionally and spent a lot of time watching it. And so that's sort of where this idea came from. And it's going to be a little more interesting because professional wrestling obviously is scripted. It's a bit more like reviewing a movie, whereas this is going to be some like impromptu and not asked for sports history discussion in an informal sort of way. So it's not exactly a one-to-one, but you kind of get the point. But shout out to Brian Zane. If you're not familiar with Wrestling with Regret and you're a wrestling fan, what are you even doing? So go watch his stuff. So I'm recording this video on the eve of the Circuit of the Americas weekend for 2023 for the NASCAR, all three top divisions actually. So I have no idea if this was if COTA is a memorable race or not in the grand scheme of things. If something notable happens, I have no idea. You do, of course, because this will be posted after the event occurs. But I am just sort of in a road course racing mood. So without further ado, the first edition of the Retro Racing Roundup is the 2012 Finger Lakes 355 at the Glen. I chose this one because it's historically significant for a number of reasons as it pertains to why the revamped NASCAR next-gen schedule sort of looks the way that it does. Not only that, but it is one of my personal favorite races through and through. And if you've been a NASCAR fan for more than even a couple of years, you've probably seen the finish to this race multiple times, and for good reason, but I'm getting way ahead of myself here. August 12th, 2012, NASCAR ventures to upstate New York to Watkins Glen International for the 22nd race of the season. This is the 30th NASCAR Sprint Cup Series race here at the Glen. And if you're not a fan of NASCAR, first of all, welcome. I don't know why you're here, but welcome. Second of all, you'll notice immediately that there's some right turns mixed in with the left turns. That's right. Watkins Glen at this time is one of just two road courses. You remember when that was a thing? Just two road courses on the NASCAR Sprint Cup schedule that season that turns both left and right. Sonoma is the other one. Very much a driver's track. It has a place on the schedule, but in my opinion isn't overly exciting, especially up to 2012. But Watkins Glen has a treasure trove of memorable moments for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, on top of being one of the longest circuits, road courses or otherwise, on the Cup schedule at that time, and also being one of the fastest. We are live on a Sunday afternoon on ESPN with Nicole Briscoe, soon-to-be Hall of Famer Rusty Wallace, and NBA legend and car owner Brad Doherty on the pre-race panel. The last race before this was a 400-miler at Pocono, which ended up being somewhat of an unremarkable race, other than the fact that a fan was struck and killed by lightning while in the process of leaving the grounds at Pocono. And we see it all the time now in the wake of this tragedy where NASCAR, if they find lightning anywhere in an 8-mile, I think it's an 8-mile radius of the track, they'll just throw a caution and order an evacuation of the grandstands. You'll be put on the 30-minute clock, the whole thing. It started with that particular race at Pocono. And people, especially races that end up getting rain shortened, even though if it's not raining at the time, the lightning usually will come ahead of the rain and then it will get rained out subsequently. People will bitch and moan about that all the time. Let's do the math here. You have wide, sparsely populated open fields for miles, and then all of a sudden the only thing in these fields are giant, tall metal bleachers filled with a bunch of people. Just put two and two together there, do the math, and also look back at past occurrences, I'm not sure that this lightning strike is probably the only time a fan has been killed by a weather event at a racetrack. So you can kind of do the math there and figure out why NASCAR has sort of erred on the side of caution, if you will. So there is some inclement weather in the area ahead of this race. So there's a huge response from track officials, which is great. Increased safety personnel presence. Even a text alert program has been set up to inform fans at the track if they should seek shelter or not. A pretty good response all in all from NASCAR and the Glen in the wake of what is a tragedy. One of the main topics of discussion for the pre-race panel is the chase, which is just 4 races away at this point. For anybody who came onto the scene during the playoff era who doesn't know really how the chase worked, the chase format at this point in history, because there were multiple sort of variations of it, the chase format in this point in history is this. It's the top 10 drivers in overall points, no matter how many wins they have, plus 2 more drivers outside of the top 10, anywhere from 11th to 20th, who do have a win. They will be the wild cards. With Jeff Gordon's win in the previous race at Pocono, which was range shortened, he is now in the hunt for one of these 2 wild card positions. Gordon, at this point, we now know, is in the twilight of his career at this point. The Pocono race was the 87th of his career. It was the first win of the year for him. And it capped off a pretty good 7-week stretch where he went all the way from 22nd up to 13th in the points. That is a huge jump. So Gordon has the second and final wildcard spot heading into the weekend. Casey Kane has the first wildcard spot, as he is the only driver outside of the top 10 with multiple wins. That's how it worked. You automatically, if you're from 20th to 11th, and there are 3 drivers ahead of you with a win in points, but you, back in 19th for some reason, have 2 wins, you have the top spot, and then it goes on points with the drivers that have 1 win. It's confusing, but definitely not as confusing as the playoffs. Other drivers with a win outside of the top 10 still vying for wild card spots include Joey Logano, who is still rocking the Joe Gibbs 20 at this point, Ryan Newman, and Kyle Busch, who, despite the win, is really having a down on his luck sort of season. A sign of things to come for the race today. Meanwhile, at the top of the standings, it is a tight 3-way race for the top spot in the points. Right now in first is Dale Earnhardt Jr., leading the way, which is a rare look for him in his Hendrick Motorsports days. Of course, 2012 is the year that he snapped that mega-long 4-year winless streak at Michigan, and this is sort of the start of his late career resurgence, which sees him win in almost every season that he competes in from here on out, and almost every season, but still a pretty good run to end his career. However, Junior is not in the lead by much. Roush Fenway teammates Matt Kenseth and Greg Biffle are close behind, as well as Junior's teammate Jimmy Johnson. They are all within 8 points of each other, which is crazy close for this point in a season. Late into the previous race at Pocono, Johnson and Kenseth went motor racing into turn number 1, and Johnson got a flat tire and took himself and Kenseth out of the race. It was the second DNF in a row for Kenseth, who got taken out by Joey Logano at Indianapolis in the race prior, which is definitely the most notable thing to happen between those 2 drivers. We do have some good road course racers in the field. Of course, they could really throw a wrinkle in that wild card battle if they were to walk away with it. The Colombian Juan Pablo Montoya is the pole sitter for the race in the Chip Ganassi 42 car. He's a former winner at the Glen, and the defending winner at the Glen is the Tasmanian Devil himself, Marcus Ambrose, who will be starting on the inside of row number 3. The rest of the top 5 starters look like this. Kyle Busch on the outside pole, Jimmy Johnson starts in 3rd, and Brad Keselowski is starting in 4th, and he was the runner-up in the previous day's Nationwide Series race. The Finger Lakes 355 at the Glen is the name of the race. The 355 in the title is actually kilometers and not freedom units. Hey! That adds up to about 220 miles for the race distance, which is about 90 laps. Not about, it is 90 laps. I don't know why he said about. I'm going to keep that in, though. Sure. 2.45 mile circuit. Technically, if you add in the booth, there are 11 turns, and they call turns 10 and 11. But they're actually 6 and 7. I don't know. I'm not just going to put a fucking map on the thing so you could look at the track. And there are 7 turns, 2.45 miles. There we go. We send it up top to the booth to get things going. The absolute GOAT of NASCAR commentary, A.B. Alan Bestwick, alongside future Hall of Famer Dale Jarrett, and underrated booth presence in my mind, Andy Petrie. They have the call for this race. Very exciting booth trio. We get the green flag, and immediately Kyle Busch takes the lead heading into the S-turns. Juan Pablo Montoya sat on the pole, but he wouldn't even lead a lap in this race. So after that bit of excitement, we sort of fan out single file for a little bit. A bulk of the green flag stretch is devoted to discussing how fast this track is and how hard it is on parts, which will become increasingly apparent as the race rolls along. Most of the racing early on is outside of the top 10 as Junior and Regan Smith are moving forward, and future Daytona 500 champion Michael McDowell, driving the Phil Parsons Racing 98 at this point, is falling backwards. On lap 5, Marcus Ambrose is challenging Jimmy Johnson for 4th place, and we go to commercial and come back, and Ambrose has made the pass. Hooray for capitalism. We missed the pass. Kyle Busch is still your leader through 9 laps, with Montoya trailing by 0.7 of a second. On lap number 9, Front Row Motorsports' David Reagan spins out road course ringer Boris Said for the 31st position. Of course, you may recall the last lap of the previous Watkins Glen race before this one, where the shoe was on the other foot. It was Boris Said who turns David Reagan on the final lap of the race, and David Reagan has 2 of the hardest impacts that we've ever seen at the road course. They actually reconfigured the walls. That's how hard he crashed. And he also took David Rudiman with him, who had another hellacious impact. One of the worst crashes of the 2010s. It seemingly is not remembered as often as I think it should, because it is a hellacious impact. But regardless, Reagan, and along with other race car drivers, have a seemingly pretty long memory, because Boris Said does not make it very long into this race without finding his way off the front bumper of David Reagan. On lap 10, we begin what will become a day-long saga of Jeff Gordon informing his team how shittily they have prepared his race car. He's tied in, he's loose in the middle, and he has no drive off, and yet somehow he's in 8th place. Alrighty, I don't know how that works. Lap 17, we get some pit strategy from some of the drivers that have elected to make 3 pit stops instead of 2. In the days before stages, before the engines had their horsepower nearly cut in half, the differences between drivers doing 2 stops versus 3 stops. A 2-stop strategy basically involves tuning the engine down a little bit. I know that seems hilarious now, but they would tune the engine power just down just a little bit. It saves a little bit extra fuel, and maybe keeps some life in the tires just a little bit, and it helps you rely on the track position that you already have. Whereas the drivers that are on 3-stop strategies, they're going balls out the whole time, keeping the engine at full song. Really lighten up those tires and ensures that you have enough fuel and enough tires to make up all the ground that you've lost by pitting in extra time compared to the other drivers. It may seem like the 2-stop strategy would have an advantage, but actually the 3-stop strategy was the winning strategy for Marcus Ambrose in the last year's race here in 2011. They bring it up on commentary a couple of different times. So 3-stop strategy may be the way to go. We'll have to see. Ryan Newman makes the first move to pit road, pitting from 6th place. Jimmy Johnson comes in from 5th the next time by. But while Johnson is pitting, Jason Leffler pushes wide out of turn 6 and goes through the gravel trap, but we stay green and go to commercial, during which Ambrose pits, sticking with his 3-stop strategy from last year. We come back on lap 23 to Jeff Gordon and Kevin Harvick on pit lane. On the next lap, Keselowski hits pit road from 3rd. Casey Kane also stops and has to disconnect the air conditioning unit because it's producing smoke. That's what you want out of your clean air system. Lap 25 is where we get our first caution of the day as Jamie McMurray blows a left front tire coming out of the S's and demolishes that car on the Armco barrier. I don't think I've ever seen an impact like that leave such a distinct marking on the car before. It looks like McMurray's door was made out of silly putty. So as McMurray is lugging that car back to pit road, Kurt Busch thinks he has a right rear tire going down, but a quick spin in turn 6 reveals that the tire is in fact fully inflated. That was a close one. I know I haven't mentioned Kurt Busch up to this point, but this is one of the many chapters in what is easily the worst year of his career. Driving for James Finch in the horribly underfunded 51 car, especially underfunded for a driver of Kurt Busch's caliber. Don't forget, Kurt Busch is a Cup Series champion, and as we'll discover in the years after this, he is still well capable of winning races. Kurt way outperforms this car, as we saw in the Sonoma race from earlier this season, where he's battling for the lead, and driving the car so hard that he actually breaks the rear track bar in the closing laps and still muscles it home for a third-place finish. This would be one of the final straws for Kurt with this team. At Talladega in the chase, Kurt would leave the team and bump Regan Smith from the 78 car, where Kurt would really start making his career resurgent and his turnaround in his personal life. But those are stories for another roundup. So this caution really serves to benefit some of the front runners on the three-stop strategy, mainly Ambrose and Keselowski. Crew chief for the race leader, Kyle Busch, is Aaron Rodgers. He says that the caution throws a wrench in their strategy, but that pitting a few laps early under caution won't mess up their fuel window at the end of the race too bad. So the top five are Kyle Busch, Juan Pablo Montoya, Tony Stewart, Martin Truex Jr., and Clint Bowyer. They all hit pit road with pretty much everybody else that hasn't pit up to this point. Pit service is complete, and Montoya, with the best stall on the end of pit road, beats Kyle Busch to the line to win the race off pit road. Tony Stewart is out third, but out fourth is Tony Stewart's gas can. Oopsies, that's a penalty. Stewart will have to restart at the tail of the field. So even though Montoya wins the race off of pit road, remember that all the three-stop cars stayed out under caution, so in control of the restart will be Keselowski, with Ambrose to his outside, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, and Kevin Harvick rounding out the top five. Montoya, first off pit road, restarts in the sixth position. Under the caution period after the pit stops, Joey Logano reports that he's broken something in the rear end, which ends up being a shock mount. So he heads to the garage. Ryan Newman would have restarted sixth, but he reports a flat tire under the caution and heads to pit road as the field is coming to green on lap number 29. Restart is pretty clean for the most part. Carl Edwards takes it 3 wide into the inner loop. Clint Bowyer is the big loser there. Montoya battling it out with Truex coming out of turn number 7, and he just about loses control there, but gathers it up. This allows Harvick to try the inside heading into turn 1, and he can't quite get it done. But Kyle's going to try the outside heading into the Estes, and that works. Good God, what a power move there. So Montoya and Rowdy Busch are in 6th and 7th, and they have a few lap fresher tires than the guys in front of them. They should be able to get up to the front and start making some moves, right? Well, Montoya won't get the chance, as literally 10 seconds later, his car suffers a lower control arm failure in the left front. And that's all she wrote for JPM today. Montoya joins his teammate Jamie McMurray in the garage, along with Joey Logano, Michael McDowell, J.J. Yaley, and Josh Wise as well. We jump ahead now to lap 35, where Truex and Kyle Busch both sneak by Gordon for 4th and 5th, respectively, as we head to commercial, and I bet Jeff Gordon is loving his car.
Oh, we're junk, man. We are absolute junk.
We come back to a pretty tight battle for the lead on lap 38, while Gordon has slipped all the way outside of the top 10. Clint Bowyer is running 9th, but apparently he has cooked his brakes. They are squishy. Next time by, Ambrose dives in on Keselowski in turn 1 to take the lead. As we head to commercial on lap 40, Alan Bestwick mentions that there are scattered showers in the area. Too bad we're still a few years away from rain tires in NASCAR. We come back on lap 44, and the only thing of note that happened while we are away is that Jeff Gordon pits, and they take some massive swings in terms of adjustments to that car. He finds himself back in 29th on pit exit. Tony Stewart, who had battled back from that pit road penalty, now finds himself back in the top 10. The booth mentions on the broadcast that there had only been 2 people ever to battle back from a penalty and finish in the top 10 at Watkins Glen. You'll see momentarily how Tony Stewart is going to factor into this statistic here. Just past halfway, lap 47, Ambrose pits from the lead, sticking with the 3-stop strategy. He brings Johnson and Harvick in with him. So that gives the lead back to Bad Brad, and nothing of note really happens for about the next 10 laps or so until Tony Stewart comes in from the 5th position into the pits. This time, he keeps all the equipment inside of the stall. During this 10-lap window, Jeff Burton and Dave Blaney both retire with mechanical issues, while Joey Logano, Kurt Busch, and Juan Pablo Montoya all return from the garage back to the track. Lap 58, Brad Keselowski pits from the lead and gives the lead back to Kyle Busch, but on that same lap, both Denny Hamlin's engine commits unalive and Martin Truex Jr. runs out of fuel. Caution number 2 is out. So now that both cautions have interrupted both pit cycles, it has really jumbled this field all up. Kyle Busch will lead a long line of cars down pit road, including Indianapolis 500 champion Sam Hornish Jr., who was in 3rd place at the time. A lot of people seem to have forgotten how weird the history of the 22 car is now that Joey Logano has been in it for a long time. But this car was only a season and a half old at this point. In 2011, Kurt Busch moves from the 2 car to pilot this 22 car, so it's an internal driver's switch for Team Penske. But Busch's time at Penske sort of goes poof right after this.
Can you get this motherfucker out of my face?
So now they bring in A.J. Allmendinger for the 2012 season to pilot the 22 car, and he's having some decent runs. He has a couple of pretty notable good runs as well. But literally minutes before the July Daytona race, A.J. Allmendinger has failed a drug test and is no longer allowed to compete in the NASCAR Cup Series. So all of a sudden now we have to bring in Sam Hornish, who, don't forget, is doing a full-time nationwide championship run at this point. And he is now going to pilot the 22 car for the rest of the season. Doing 2 simultaneous schedules like that, that is an insane commitment. So kudos to Sam Hornish Jr. For running up front here today and running well as well for Team Penske in the Nationwide Series. In this long line of cars that I just mentioned, Marcus Ambrose is one of those cars. He decides to pit with these guys and comes off of pit road 3rd behind Kyle and Matt Kenseth, who we get to bring up in the race for the first time. Top 6 starters on this lap 62 restart. Brad Keselowski and Tony Stewart on the front row. Then it is Dale Jr. and Clint Bowyer on row 2. Greg Biffle and Kyle Busch are now on row 3. Keselowski gets a great restart. Stewart holds off a challenge from Bowyer for 2nd. And remember, Bowyer is still having brake issues at this point. Kyle gets around Jr. for 5th in the first few turns as well. Ambrose passes Kenseth for 7th heading into turn 6. The next time by in turn 1, Truex runs wide and wipes out Casey Kane. We stay green and women everywhere cry as heartthrob Casey Kane drops all the way to the back of the field. Just a lap later, Jason Leffler's 49 car slows down on the forbidden section of the inner loop. His engine has also gone kaboom, and caution number 3 for the day is out. So this is kind of the bum out moment here, but it was one of my first thoughts that popped into my mind when I was writing this script. So if you're curious, Jason Leffler makes 4 more starts here in the 2012 season in the Cup Series, and then does make 1 start in the Cup Series in 2013, actually the week before his untimely passing in a sprint car accident in New Jersey. So don't get to see a whole lot more of Jason Leffler in the Cup Series, unfortunately. No easy segue from that, but something that will become quite apparent under this caution period is that it is definitely precipitating around Watkins Glen. We work about 4 laps under this caution period, then the sprinkles subside for the most part, so they go back green with 23 laps to go in the race. There was no track drying, and again, no rain tires, so this track might be a little greasy. Not that it's not going to become a little bit greasier here soon. Top 5 on the restart: Keselowski, Stewart, Bowyer, Kyle Busch, and Greg Biffle. Keselowski with another great restart, and what the hell is Ambrose doing? Sticking a 3 wide between Biffle and Busch heading into turn 1. Biffle is the big loser here as Busch and Ambrose get by. Next time by into turn 1, Ambrose dives to the inside and passes Busch and Bowyer. Holy shit, Marcus Ambrose is feeling himself right now. Bowyer's still dealing with squishy brakes at this point, so he's just trying to hold on. Coming to 19 laps to go, Stewart is closing in on Keselowski for the lead, but whoops, solo, unassisted spin for Tony Stewart. Caution number 4 is out, and that one feels bad. Stewart coming back from the penalty to be a serious contender late in the race, and he just gets into the wet rumble strip there on the inside of turn number 7 and just sort of loses it, ass packs it into the inside wall. This sort of kicks off a stretch for Tony Stewart where Watkins Glen is his kryptonite, although what happens here is not anything comparable to what is going to happen to him the next 2 years at Watkins Glen weekend. Heading into next year's race at Watkins Glen 2013, Tony Stewart is in a sprint car race, crashes, suffers a compound fracture of his tibia and fibula, and misses the rest of the 2013 season. Of course, I don't want to get into it here. It's not the right time and place for this sort of thing, but the Kevin Ward Jr. accident happens on Watkins Glen weekend in 2014. And so Tony Stewart voluntarily sits out the next 3 races after that. So 2-year stretch, I guess 3 years if you lump this one in, where Watkins Glen really just sucks for Tony Stewart. He makes 2 more starts at one of his best tracks, Watkins Glen, The 2015 race, his big comeback, I guess, is a DNF. He has a drive shaft failure and finishes dead last, 43rd. And he finally sort of breaks this little curse that's hanging over his time at Watkins Glen with his final start at the track in 2016 and gets back to a top 5 finish. But here we go. We're going to restart with 16 laps to go. Keselowski is in front. Ambrose in second, who has been slicing and dicing through the field. And Kyle Busch back in third. All the pieces are starting to fall in place here for this wonderful final stretch. We cross the stripe for the green, and almost immediately Kyle Busch dives to driver's right to make it 3 wide into turn 1 for the lead. Keselowski backs out, Ambrose goes wide into the runoff, and Kyle Busch is back out front with Keselowski second and Ambrose in third. What a ballsy move from Rowdy, but would you expect anything less? Things calm down for a few laps, and we take our final commercial break of the race and come back with 11 laps to go, where Keselowski has caught Kyle Busch and is pressing the issue. But now Keselowski starts to back up to the clutches of Ambrose. With 10 laps to go, Ambrose looks to the inside of Keselowski. They go side by side into the S's with Keselowski slipping up and throwing a block heading into the long straight. Ambrose outbreaks Brad heading into the inner loop, and Ambrose is now in second. 9 to go and 8 to go pass with nothing of note. Ambrose is closing in on Kyle Busch, but has to make up a lot of time. And Keselowski is pulling away from Greg Biffle, so Bad Brad is just firmly planted in the third place out in no man's land for the time being. 7 to go. Dale Jr. is in 10th, tied at the current moment for the points lead, and solo unassisted spin number 2 of the race, and we're not done with that just yet. Junior has to pit for tires, but the caution flag never came out, so it is a green flag, unscheduled pit stop for Dale Jr. By the way, the spin cost him the points lead. He never gets that back for the rest of the 2012 season. 4 laps to go. Kyle Busch is starting to pull away. Damn, this one is over, isn't it? Oh well, but not so fast, Buster Brown. No, something magical is happening right now. 3 laps to go. Not captured by any camera from the ESPN crew. Bobby Labonte riding around in the 21st position, driving the car owned by the aforementioned pre-race panelist Brad Doherty. He has something break in the rear end of his car. So Bobby, who is just passing the pit entrance at this point, really can't do anything. So he has to limp this car around the entire track, slathering not just the racing surface, but the racing line. Positively slathering it with rear-end grease. And we talked about his slippy track from the sprinkles earlier. Now we're in for a whole new level of slippy here. Just as this is happening, Brad Keselowski gets on the radio and says that he has pushed too hard. He's got nothing left. But at about that time, Ambrose and Kyle Busch start slowing way down for some reason. I don't know. And Brad starts gaining ground on the top 2. Joe Nemechek slow on the track, but he makes it back to the pits without any further issue. It's just like following a snowplow on the interstate in winter. It's 2 laps to go. Kyle Busch is absolutely plowing through oil all over the track, paving the way for Ambrose and Keselowski. And while Brad has now caught Ambrose, he will make the pass for second on the outer loop. On the straightaway, Kyle passes the now lap Dale Jr. and starts weaving back and forth. He is given up a full second and change in the last half a lap. And the boys in the booth are just starting to lose their minds just a little bit. Coming to the white flag, Keselowski is there. And with this line from Dale Jarrett on the commentary team, shit is about to hit the fan.
There's something wrong with the 18.
There wasn't, but there was about to be. They fan out 3 wide. Kyle Busch on the outside coming into the S's. Brad looks to the inside. Busch comes down to block, but Brad is there. Kyle Busch goes around. No caution because he will gather it up, but Brad is the leader now, and he has 2 big problems. First of all, a tire rub on the left front tire. The other problem is directly in his rearview mirror as he's got Marcus Ambrose right behind him. Slipping and sliding all over this greasy track, Brad and Ambrose take a big slide into the inner loop, both plowed through the grass twice. Brad is slow in the bottom of the outer loop, and Ambrose makes a diamond and gives Keselowski a big whack coming out of the turn, and Bestwick is loving this as much as I am. The bump works for Ambrose as he passes Keselowski on the outside of corner exit, but Brad is right behind Ambrose heading into turn 6, and he'll lay a bumper of his own in. Why not? Ambrose has to use the runoff. They're side by side through turn 7, but Ambrose has the better line, and Brad gets into the grease by the wall. Alan Bestwick, take it away.
Marcus Ambrose is going to win at Watkins Glen in a remarkable last lap turn of events.
Whew. What a finish. What a finish. What a finish. What a finish. While all this is happening, though, Jeff Gordon completes the solo unassisted spin trifecta, which really puts the poop emoji stamp on his poopy day. But wow. What an incredible final 2 laps. Just unbelievable action from these front 3. Kyle Busch is not very happy, of course, over the radio. Would you expect anything less considering what just happened? But he comes across the line to finish in 7th, so really it could have been worse. Obviously, it was almost way better, but it could have been worse. The first interview we cut to post-race is Kyle Busch's crew chief, Aaron Judge, who solves the mystery for everyone watching at home wondering what the hell had just happened. He points out that the 47 car caused a lot of the calamity here, but he also blames Brad for crashing the 18, which I don't think is completely fair. Like, obviously, there was contact between the two, but looking at the grander circumstances of the whole thing, first of all, it's the last lap. Brad has the position there. Kyle comes down on Brad. And also, the track is entirely covered in axle grease and rain. So, like, I mean, I'm not going to expect an unbiased interview from the crew chief of the guy who just got wrecked from the lead on the final lap. I would not expect that. But, and I think even the debate is still in the air. I personally... I don't blame it even on Kyle. I don't blame it on Brad. I don't blame it on Marcos, of course. Like, it's just all the circumstances sort of compounded to make this big sort of explosion of things happening on the final lap. So it's nobody's fault. And by the way, of course, Kyle Busch declines to be interviewed post-race. Not a surprise. Probably the right thing for him to do. Brad then proceeds to park his car in Marcus Ambrose's pit stall, which can go one of 2 ways. This time, it goes the good way. Brad gets out of the car, shakes the hand of every crew member on the 9 team. Very classy. He is up next on the interview train. He erroneously attributes the fluid on the track to Kyle Busch. But he says that there wasn't anything that he could do to avoid contact with Kyle. He says the racing with Marcus was just the way it ought to be. And with all of that clean-ish beating and banging and whatnot, Marcus Ambrose pulling into victory lane, he reflects sort of the same sentiment as Brad, saying that that's how racing should be. He dedicates the 2nd win of his Cup Series career to his dad, who has been in hospital. So the top 5 finishers are obviously Marcus Ambrose and Brad Keselowski, 1st and 2nd. Jimmie Johnson, I only brought up his name really on the pit cycles, but he finishes 3rd, a completely unremarkable day for him, especially in comparison to what just happened. And then Clint Bowyer in 4th. Sam Hornish Jr. finishes in P5. He ran the rest of the 2012 season in the 22 car for Team Penske, with his best finish outside of this 5th place finish being an 11th place finish that would happen on 3 separate occasions the rest of the season. After being relieved of the Team 22 duties for, I believe, the incoming Joey Logano, he would focus his efforts the next few seasons on winning a championship for Team Penske in the Nationwide Series, and unfortunately to no avail, although he did come within a few caution laps of doing that. What's funny is that he actually would run one more full-time Cup Series season in the 9 car, the very 9 car that had just won that day's race, as Marcus Ambrose had left already. So a bit of a reversal of fortune, although unfortunately Sam Hornish Jr. did not enjoy the same successes that Marcus Ambrose did. The drivers that finished 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, Brad Keselowski, Jimmie Johnson, Clint Bowyer, they would all be very entangled for the rest of the 2012 season. After this, in the final 10 races of the season, which is the chase for the Sprint Cup at this point in time, they would combine to win half of those races, 2 for Brad, 2 for Jimmie, and 1 for Clint. And they would be the 3 drivers that were mathematically eligible to win the Drivers' Championship at the race at Homestead. even though Jimmy Johnson suffered a brake failure at Phoenix. And I don't know if you've ever seen what happened to Clint Boyer in that race. It's sort of a hidden gem. It never really gets brought up. At Homestead, Johnson would have another mechanical failure. Keselowski would finish high enough to secure himself his first Sprint Cup championship and his only one to date. And that is probably going to stay that way, although I would love to see another one. It's really the flip side of the coin for Marcus Ambrose from this point on. This was his second career Cup Series win. Like I mentioned, it would be his last. Despite the win here, Ambrose did not qualify for the chase. He came in as what I believe the third or fourth wild card spot, and of course there would only be two that would go on to the chase. So he did not qualify. He finishes 18th in the points at the end of the 2012 season. All eyes were on him the next year when they rolled back into Watkins Glen for the three-peat, but he would get wrecked in the closing laps of that race. 2014 was his last year in the sport. He recorded 3 top 5 finishes that season, including a runner-up at the Glen, losing in a great shootout to A.J. Allmendinger, who I mentioned failed the drug test in the 22 car this particular season. So A.J. Allmendinger right now is on an absolute tear, and everybody watching this will now know how A.J. Allmendinger did in the race that is going to be recorded or going to happen tomorrow as I'm recording this video. So maybe A.J. Allmendinger wins that race. Who knows? But after the battle with A.J. Allmendinger, he was gone from NASCAR, never to be seen stateside again. And a lot of people didn't follow Marcus Ambrose's career afterwards, and that's really because it was brief. At the end of the 2014 Cup season, Ambrose would move back to his native Australia to compete full-time in the International V8 Supercar Championship, driving for one of the most legendary teams on the grid, Dick Johnson Racing. When he was announced as the driver, it was also announced that Roger Penske would be partnering with Johnson, making DJR Team Penske. Ambrose would start the final race of the 2014 season for DJR Team Penske and would start the 2015 season opener before stepping aside for a temporary leave of absence, which ended up being a permanent leave of absence. He said something along the lines of not realizing how out of sorts he was as a person, and how living in the United States had sort of dug him into a hole that it would take him a long time to come out of. And if he were to try and compete in the V8 Supercar Series full-time, he just didn't think it was worth it. He said it was time to get out. And speaking as a NASCAR fan from that point, and just as a NASCAR fan in general, I think, speaking for all of us, I think we all really enjoyed Marcus Ambrose on and off the track. He got into a couple of skirmishes on pit road and always drove the car really hard. It wasn't always up to snuff for him, but man, he really made the most out of what he had. We all really enjoyed Marcus on track and really miss him as well. I was hoping with this next-gen rallying and maybe exhibition races going international, I would love to see Marcus Ambrose get in the next-gen car and absolutely wheel it. But I think the chances of that as time goes on are probably diminishing, unfortunately. All right, so how do we grade this bad boy? I'm going to be taking looks at little something like this on a scale of 1 to 10 for each category. We'll look at how good the racing was for each event, as well as the finish itself, whether that be the last few laps or just the act of crossing the line, whatever I deem to be the finish of the race. And then we'll get a little more subjective than that, I guess, with memorability and historical significance. Let's start with the racing. Honestly, there are some good on-track battles here and there, but the race as a whole isn't really battle-heavy, battle-intensive. But when it's good, it's great, especially on the restarts. I think it's a solid 7 out of 10 there. The finish is on a whole nother level comparatively. This has almost everything that you could absolutely ask for in any finish at any track. Bumping, rubbing, lead swapping, even a little bit of crashing, why not? The only thing that prevents this from me from being a solid 10 is that they don't finish side by side at the line, but that only takes away from it just that little bit much. I'm going to give it a 9.5, and that'll have to do. For memorability, I think we're really looking at how often this race is cited in NASCAR lore, how favorable it's looked on with the modern lens, and how often we see replays of key moments. And you probably know where I'm going with this already. And Well, every time we've gone back to the Glen since this, which has been every year, obviously, except for 2020, thanks to the pandemic, this finish is always front and center in the marketing, in the replays that are shown, with the potentials of this track, what we can expect, what we should expect, although nothing has quite lived up to that. This race obviously is looked on very favorably and has aged terrifically, even though one of the key parties and one of the manufacturers involved in this finish have both bowed out of the sport. So I'd say this gets an 8 out of 10 on memorability for me. Finally, historical significance. Obviously, there were 2 road courses in 2012. There are 6 now in the Cup Series. We've had as many as 7 in the last couple of seasons. Viewership for road courses increased after this. Watkins Glen itself has sold out to capacity every year after this. This race went so far in reinvigorating road course racing in NASCAR. I would say that this is one of the 3 key pre-next-gen events that you can cite on why NASCAR has decided to go in the direction that they have in road course racing and building the next-gen car sort of around the idea of being more versatile for the road courses. The other 2 being Chase Elliott's first career victory, which happened at Watkins Glen, as well as in that same year in 2018, the Roval. Being as smashing of a success as it is, which I have no doubt will be covered in a future installment of the Retro Racing Roundup here. Not only is this a significant road course race just in general, but it's always in fan polls and industry polls as being one of the greatest NASCAR finishes ever, just in general. NBC Sports even named it the best finish of the 2010s. Brad Keselowski himself has said this is the best finish that he's ever been involved in. So it is much beloved in every regard. So with all that said, for historical significance, it gets a pretty easy 9 out of 10 for me. So all in all, out of a possible 40 marks, this one gets a 33.5, which is a high benchmark to set for our series opener here. So this is sort of what I'm thinking for the way forward for the Retro Racing Roundup. First of all, if you've made it to the end of this, thank you. Be sure to hit like and subscribe on your way out, but we still have more here, just a little bit more. For the Retro Racing Roundup, I think outside of the next installment here, which I already have determined, I'm going to leave it up to you, the viewers. Starting with Episode 3, I'm going to put a poll up for what you think you would like to see as the next installment of the Retro Racing Roundup. It'll be 4 randomly selected races each week, but I need to know what you want to be discussed. So leave in the comments what races you want me to do Roundup on. Your suggestions should probably look something like this. The series, which I want to point out, I'm not limiting it to just the NASCAR Cup Series. It could be the NASCAR Xfinity Series, NASCAR Trucks. It could be Formula One, IndyCar, V8 Supercars, World of Outlaws, Monster Jam, anything. Need the year it happened and the name of the event. If you want to be super helpful, even link me to the event in question so I can just save a little bit of work. There are a couple of parameters here. The races have to exist in a broadcast form in their entirety, and I know that excludes a lot of the early races of Formula One and NASCAR history, but it would make things really difficult to piece together for a compelling visual video if there were no broadcasts to sort of put my commentary over. And also, don't pick anything like too macabre or too depressing. There will obviously be races that will skirt by this that have such a high historical significance and also have something dark and depressing within them that have to be covered with a more serious lens and less jokey in tone and all that. But these also don't have to be significantly good races. These can be significantly bad races, as you will find out in Episode 2, the Retro Racing Roundup. We're going with the 2008 Brickyard 400. The good year, bad year, one of the worst NASCAR races of all time. I've actually never watched that race in full, and I'm not looking forward to it. So I'm going to settle in with that today, and we'll be back next week with the 2008 Brickyard 400 for the Retro Racing Roundup. So we hope to see you again very soon. But until we meet again, I am Tommy Cook for Turn 200. Hope you like this one, and we'll see you in the next one.